Margaret had spent 37 years at Rosewood Diner, her hands steady as she poured coffee, her smile a quiet gift to every soul who passed through those glass doors. She'd served truckers, dreamers, and the occasional celebrity, treating each with the same warmth she offered the regulars who knew her by name. Her life was woven into the rhythm of the diner, the clink of plates, the hum of conversation, the faint sizzle of bacon on the grill. She'd raised 4 kids on her own, her youngest, Danny, born with cerebral palsy, teaching her the weight of a child's quiet struggles. Margaret knew the look of someone who felt the world's judgment before they could name it. On this particular Tuesday in October, as sunlight slanted through the diner's windows, she noticed a little girl sitting alone in booth 7, tears glistening on her cheeks. The child couldn't have been more than 8, her yellow dress dotted with daisies, her small hands folded tightly in her lap as if trying to disappear. Cruel laughter drifted from the table beside her, sharp and careless, cutting through the morning chatter. Margaret's heart tightened. She glanced at the girl's father, a man in a tailored suit, his attention glued to his phone, voice clipped as he argued about stock prices and mergers. He hadn't noticed his daughter's pain, and that fact settled like a stone in Margaret's chest. What happened next would ripple far beyond the diner's walls, a story we're thrilled to share on Midnight Tales. Sophie, the little girl, had soft brown curls and eyes that held a fragile kind of trust. Margaret approached, coffee pot in hand, her apron slightly frayed at the edges from years of work. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, sliding into the booth across from the child. "I'm Margaret. What's your name?" The girl sniffled, wiping her nose with a napkin. "Sophie," she whispered. "Those boys are being mean to me." Margaret's gaze flicked to the teenagers at the next table, 3 boys around 16, their smirks sharp as knives. One mimicked Sophie's expressions, his friends snickering into their sodas. Margaret's blood simmered, but she kept her voice calm, steady as always. She'd faced bullies before, kids, adults, didn't matter. They all crumbled under a firm, kind resolve. She stood and walked to their table. "Boys," she said, her tone warm but unyielding, "you need to stop this right now." The ringleader, a lanky kid with bleached hair, leaned back with a smirk. "We're just eating, lady. Not doing anything." Margaret held his gaze, her eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd raised teenagers and wrangled diner chaos for decades. "You're hurting a sweet girl who's done nothing to you. Either show some kindness or find somewhere else to eat." The boy's smirk faltered, something in Margaret's steady presence hitting a nerve. Maybe she reminded him of someone, a grandmother, a teacher. "Whatever," he muttered, but the mocking stopped. The other boys shifted uncomfortably, their laughter dying out. Margaret returned to Sophie, whose wide eyes followed her every move. "Thank you," Sophie said softly. "Nobody ever tells them to stop." Margaret's throat tightened. How many times had this child faced cruelty while the world looked away? She glanced at Sophie's father, still engrossed in his call, his world a blur of numbers and deadlines. James Morrison, she'd later learn his name, was one of the wealthiest men in the country, a titan of industry whose life revolved around boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. But right now, he was just a father missing the moment that mattered most. James ended his call, glancing at his watch, impatience etched into his face. "Sophie, we need to go," he said, already reaching for his wallet. "I've got a meeting in 20 minutes. Sophie's face fell, her small voice barely audible. "But Daddy, I haven't finished my pancakes." Margaret watched the familiar dance, busy parent, distracted but well-meaning, rushing through the moments that shaped a child's heart. She'd seen it countless times, but something about Sophie's quiet resignation stirred her. The girl's posture, the way she shrank into herself, echoed Margaret's memories of Danny, who'd struggled with simple tasks not out of defiance but because his body demanded extra effort. Margaret made a choice. She approached James's table, her voice gentle but direct. "Excuse me, sir, I don't mean to intrude, but your daughter was upset earlier. Those boys were bothering her." James blinked, caught off guard. What boys? He followed Margaret's gesture to the teenagers, who were now gathering their things to leave. For the first time, he really looked at Sophie, not a quick glance to check if she was ready, but a true look. Her tear-streaked cheeks, her hunched shoulders, the way she poked at her pancakes without eating. "Sophie, honey, what happened?" he asked, his voice softening, losing its corporate edge. Sophie hesitated, glancing at Margaret for courage. "They were making faces at me," she said. "They said I look funny and talk weird." James's stomach twisted, a cold weight settling in. He'd been sitting 3 feet away, lost in his phone, while his daughter was humiliated. How had he missed it? He looked at Margaret, this waitress who'd seen what he hadn't, who'd stepped in where he'd failed. "Your daughter is beautiful and kind," Margaret said quietly. "But children like Sophie feel the world's cruelty more deeply. They need extra protection." The words hit James like a slap. He was a man who controlled empires, who navigated hostile takeovers and market crashes with ease. Yet he'd failed to shield his 8-year-old from teenage cruelty in a diner. The irony was crushing. He looked at Sophie, really saw her, and the guilt was a physical ache. How many times had she faced this alone while he chased the next deal? "How often does this happen?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophie pushed a piece of pancake around her plate. "A lot," she said. "At school, the playground, restaurants. People stare and whisper." James felt sick. His daughter had been navigating a world of judgment while he prided himself on providing the best schools, therapists, everything money could buy. Margaret refilled his coffee, her movements unhurried despite the growing breakfast rush. She'd seen enough families to recognize a man grappling with his own blindness. "Mr. Morrison," she said, having overheard his name on his call, "your daughter is lucky to have you. But she needs more than financial security. She needs to know she's your priority." The truth in her words was a sledgehammer. When had he last spent real time with Sophie? Not rushed bedtime stories or distracted drives, but true, focused time. He couldn't remember, and the shame burned. His ex-wife had warned him during their custody battles, but he dismissed her as bitter. Now, he saw the truth. Sophie looked up, her brown eyes searching. "Daddy, are you disappointed that I'm different?" The question pierced him. How could she think that? "Oh, sweetheart, no," he said, taking her hand. "You're perfect as you are. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel otherwise." But even as he spoke, he knew words weren't enough. Sophie's smile was practiced, guarded, the smile of a child used to being an afterthought. Margaret watched, hope and concern mingling. She'd seen parents make promises in moments of guilt, only to slip back into old habits. But she wasn't done yet. She sat beside Sophie, surprising even herself. "You know what, honey? I think your daddy needs to learn what makes little girls feel special. And I think you can show him." Sophie's eyes lit up as she pulled out a worn notebook filled with colored pencil drawings. James hadn't even noticed she'd brought it. Page after page revealed her world, their house with imagined flowers, a dog they didn't have, and most painfully, scenes of them together doing things they'd never done, flying kites, baking cookies, reading under a tree. Each was signed Sophie Morrison in careful letters. "These are beautiful, Princess," James said, his voice thick. He'd never asked about her art, never seen the world through her eyes. "When did you draw this one?" he asked, pointing to a picnic scene. Sophie looked down, shy. "I draw things I wish we could do. Miss Jennifer at school says imagination is important." Margaret nodded. "Sophie's been showing me her drawings every time you come in." The words stung. A waitress had become his daughter's confidant because he hadn't made time. James made a decision, startling himself. "I'm canceling my meetings today," he said, typing rapidly on his phone. Sophie stared, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "Are you sure, Daddy? What about your important meeting?" He looked at her, seeing past the Down syndrome to the bright, creative soul she was. "You're my most important meeting," he said, meaning every word. Margaret smiled as father and daughter planned an impromptu day together, James listening to Sophie with the focus he usually reserved for boardrooms. It was a small moment, but Margaret knew small moments could change everything. If this story's touching your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to Midnight Tales for more stories that remind us what matters. 3 months later, Margaret was wiping tables during the afternoon lull when the diner's door chimed. James and Sophie walked in, paint splattered and smiling, their bond palpable. Sophie rushed over, hugging Margaret tightly. "Look what Daddy and I made." She held up a canvas of bright blue and yellow swirls, painted with joy. James carried his own lopsided landscape, grinning. "We've been taking art classes together," he said. "Sophie's teaching me about colors and imagination." Margaret poured their coffee and chocolate milk, marveling at James's transformation. The tense, distracted man was gone, replaced by a father who radiated contentment. "The funny thing is," James said, "I thought slowing down would ruin my business. But my companies are doing better. Being present makes you sharper everywhere." He squeezed Sophie's hand. "Plus, I discovered I have the most amazing daughter." Sophie beamed. "Daddy's coming to my school play, and we're getting a dog, and Tuesdays are our art day." Margaret's heart swelled. This was why she stayed at the diner, not for the paycheck, but for moments like these. Sophie handed her a wrapped package, a drawing of the three of them, Margaret in a superhero cape, labeled Margaret the Kindness Angel. Tears pricked Margaret's eyes as she hugged Sophie. James shook her hand. "You saved my relationship with my daughter. I can't repay that. Just keep being there for her," Margaret said. "That's all she needs." As they left hand in hand, Margaret felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd changed their lives with a simple act of kindness. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments and join us on Midnight Tales for more tales of love and connection.